Welcome to the Only God Stories podcast, where we believe testimonies are powerful. In this podcast, your faith will be built as we hear from people from all walks of life who recognize the power of God in their lives. To hear more testimonies or for the opportunity to share a story of your own, check us out on our website at onlygodstories.org.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Only God Stories podcast. I'm Joseph, and we are back with you. I've got my wife Tiffany here, and we've got a special guest today. Her name is Leah Outen, and she is a published author. And when we had a chance to be able to meet Leah and hear her story, we knew that she'd be a great guest for our listeners to be able to hear. And just even as a reminder, we share stories on here for us to be reminded of God's faithfulness in the past to give us the faith for the future. And so, Leah, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Get us going as we get started today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to share my God story and hope that it inspires others that have walked this journey or just know someone who has. So I guess like the biggest thing is I'm a birth mom of almost 20 years and chose adoption when I was 16 and just felt that's where God met me. And just I felt him so present because I felt like I had nowhere else to turn. And that really, started my journey of God was so present through so much of my life, but just on that journey of the story he was writing for me and changing my heart and my life. And then just what that's looked like and just seeing his fingerprints throughout that. So that was almost 20 years ago. And I now have 5 kids that I parent with my husband. I love writing. I feel like that was a gift that God, bestowed on me when I came to know him, and just using my experiences through writing to help educate other people about open adoption and about the birth mom experience and being a young mom, because I was a teen mom as well. And that's just led to a lot of opportunities to work with other adoptive parents and educate. And so my book speaks about my story, and I'm excited and that it's out in the world to help encourage other people too.
It's an incredible book. So Leah's book is called The 16th Year, and I highly recommend it. I'll talk more about it later. But Leah, you've had such a beautiful ministry come out of your story, and an amazing book. It's truly just a memoir of your experience. And we will not get into everything that's in the book. So don't think for a second just because you're hearing her story on this call, there's going to be a lot more to the story. So I highly recommend you pick up that book as well. But we will jump into just part of your story. So could you take us back to the beginning of what really set the stage for you to consider adoption? What led you to adoption?
Yeah. So just like with the book, just a little piece, I feel like with so much with birth parents, there's usually trauma involved. And there's a crisis moment. And for me, that was how I grew up, was really difficult. And that led to me seeking, boyfriends and attention and love from, earthly things and boyfriends and things like that instead of Jesus. And so that set me, I was pregnant at 16. I had just found out. And so that is where God really started to meet me where I was in that, and discovering the void I was trying to fill is Jesus. And so back then, open adoption wasn't really known or talked about. And so I was really set on parenting for a while because I already loved her and, wanted to be a part of her life, and to know that it wasn't, that I didn't not love her or not want her. But so I thought parenting was my only option, since abortion was something I wasn't willing to consider. And so, but I still just couldn't find peace with it. And so I was turning to the Lord going, tell me what to do. I was talking to other birth moms. I was talking to teen moms, just trying to make an educated decision. And then throughout the months, God just became just a close friend initially. And then by 7 months, there was just a really clear defining day where it was just so evident. It was just so clear of what he was calling me to do. And the first of that was to surrender my life to him and stop trying to do things my way. And the second thing was trust me with not only your life, but your child's life, and to choose open adoption, and to be able to pick her family and to still have a relationship with her. and to trust him that those promises would be fulfilled. And that's what it's looked like for the last almost 20 years. And he's worked it out.
So good.
Well,
Can you, before we actually go further into your story, can you explain what is open adoption to an average listener? Like, honestly, I hadn't even heard of open adoption until the last few years. So I know that I'm not the only one out there that this is a new concept.
especially for our male listeners that may need a little extra help. All right, here we
A
go.
little extra help.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some people don't even know like what's a birth mom. And so a birth mom is someone who has relinquished her rights, a birth dad, a birth parent. You've signed away your rights legally, so that an adoptive parent can, be that person in their life. So with open adoption, it's where there's still maintained contact. So there's a whole spectrum of that where it can be from just, photos and letters and updates with scheduled time throughout the year, or it could be where ours is very, very open to where we have visits. I used to go stay at their house. She comes to, now that she's a teenager, she'll come and stay at my house, and she'll stay for like a month in the summer. Like, it's very, very open on our side. And just for us, it's just become a kind of different blended family where it's not a co-parenting situation, but I'm here to answer her questions, to know that she is loved. To have like biological mirrors of this is who you look like and this is where this talent comes from, and just answering some of those questions that adoptees can struggle with their identity. So I'm here to kind of help. She has nature and nurture to walk alongside her as she grows.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. That's I'm sure there's, as you said, all different ends of the spectrum. I love even just the scenario that you have and how well that's working. And I want to go back to some of what you've talked about already to a certain degree, all the way back to your wrestle. You have this internal wrestle. It sounds like, if I'm hearing correctly, you have this internal wrestle of being able to say, man, I want to be able to parent this child. But Lord, I feel like you're telling me that there's a different direction. And can you kind of take us to those moments of like, what are you feeling? Or like, what really tips the scale as to where you're like, hey, this is the path that I need to choose. I guess maybe a little bit more some of the feeling, but also a little bit more pragmatic. Like, do you talk to people? Do you listen to people? I'm sure you get all types of thoughts and opinions. I mean, take us in. I mean, so to give us some backstory, my mom was 16 when she had me. I'm sure she'll love me saying that right now. And some of that journey, but there's all sorts of stories that I've heard of during that season. And I'm sure it had similar to yours as well. Take us into that spot.
Yeah, absolutely. The book definitely dives into all those feelings very deeply, and all the people that God put in my life to help me with this decision and just encourage me for whatever I decided. But I feel like that internal wrestling is exactly it. And it was just months of turmoil. And I think I described it like a tug of war between my heart and my head, where my heart wanted to be her mom. I wanted to be the one to, pick her up from school and to be in that role. But my head was like, logically, this doesn't make sense. And so, and that stems from, I grew up with a single mom, and I grew up with, traveling back and forth between my mom and my dad. And I really wanted her to have, logically, I wanted her to have stability and to start her life with a mom and a dad who are ready to parent. And I don't think in her situation, like, I was lucky to have my dad still around and present. But in her situation, her dad was really checked out and didn't want to be involved at all. So that was weighing heavily on me that, well, yes, I could have parented, and my parents were very supportive. I really wanted her to have that father figure because I was figuring out how important that is. And I just wanted her to have something, different than what I could give her at that time. And so I think it started with kind of that thinking logically about what is best for her, and talking to birth moms, talking to teen moms, and just really seeing how hard it is to be a teen mom and a single mom. And yes, it can work, and it I'm glad for them. And, down the road I did as well. But, I just felt that pulling of like, consider something else and make an educated decision. But it wasn't until I discovered open adoption that I really considered adoption, because like I said, with closed adoption, I could not imagine not knowing how she was doing, any of those kinds of things. So there was, it was all of that involved. I also had a counselor that I was taken to from the very beginning. So my parents were just so on top of it, of just really supporting me in so many different ways. I've had incredible teachers who were speaking life over me and encouraging me. There's so much that God just put into place to help through that wrestling season, and to just love me through it. And that was such a changing, it's just a changing time in my life where I felt so just nestled in with love to safely wrestle through all this with support.
That's good. So whenever I think about just seeing God in your story, because I have read your book, so I know a lot about the struggles and everything that you talked about and how you got support places and the hard times. But what I loved about your story too are the confirmations you had along the way. That, I mean, it kind of reminds me of in the Old Testament when Elijah is in the cave, and it says that, you know, God moved in these big ways where like there was like earthquake and all these things, big wind, all those things. And God wasn't actually in any of those things. And his voice came after in a whisper. And whenever I look at your story, a lot of the like little only God moments are like small whispers from God. And that's the picture I get. So could you share some of those confirmations, some of those like whispers from God that gave you that confidence to walk out your decision in an open adoption?
Yeah, I think there was one piece of it was just the people that God was putting in my life, like teachers and things like that, since I moved. But like making the adoption decision was so clear. I described going to a mountain on a short little hike, and how God, I could just feel his presence with me there, looking out at the overlook. And that it was that, you know, that whisper that you're talking about, where it's just, I felt like my eyes were unveiled to like, if you choose to parent, this is what your life is going to look like. And that's not what's best for you and best for this child, and to trust me with her future and trust me with your future. And honestly, that's a grieving moment. It was hard to kind of face the reality of like, I'm not in a place to be everything that she needs, or like that's a devastating reality to admit that. And so but it also was so comforting to just be like, okay, like, if I don't know how to explain it, comforting that I don't have to see the picture, it's trusting that he can see it. And that the peace I felt in that is what gave me the confidence to trust him and to walk, you know, take it day by day and step by step. And of course, even though I've, you know, made this adoption decision and feel like, okay, I'm going to trust you with what you're calling me to do, it's still really scary because you can't see the big picture.
Right.
And, you know, am I going to find the right family who has all the things I'm hoping for her? And will they uphold these promises of openness that I'm really looking for? And it was in that's where the confirmations for me really came into place, where I found like the perfect family in the first profile. And it was just little clues of like, we had the same kind of dog. And, you know, they had picked out nearly the same exact name. I had named her Kaylee Ann because I thought I was going to parent her, and that's who she was for me. And they had picked out the name Kayla Ann without us even ever talking about it. And
so wild.
They're
like, it's so wild.
Like, all the names, and it's both of us picked it because of family names. And so like now she has this name that I picked out, but it still is filled with pieces of both her adoptive and her birth family side. So it's just really neat. Like that was the biggest confirmation to me that I was choosing the right family and I was walking in the right path. And there was just little things like that kept happening, but that was the biggest one that was just really clear that God was like, this is the way to go. And just how well they loved me as a person, just caring not just for this baby, but for me as an important person in their life too, was so so comforting, that we could just create our vision of open adoption together. That was really helpful.
Well, Leah, I just have to applaud just the courage that it had to have taken in that season. And I mean, for any of us that are parents, I mean, one of the hardest things for us to do is to say, hey, I want to be able to trust God with my kiddos. And whether you're in proximity every single day or whether it's a scenario like this with an open adoption, there's a level of all of us as parents that we have to say, God, I trust you with our kids, whether they're far away from the Lord or whether they're close from the Lord. And I know you've seen his faithfulness throughout the years, but I would love for you to, I mean, it's been almost 20 years since then. We're not doing the math, okay? But it's been almost 20 years since then. And we'd love to know, like, how has God shown up in more recent years? What's that look like in your life and in this process or in this journey?
Yeah, I feel like just how God has taken her through her childhood, and we're still here, we're still walking it together, has been such a blessing. And just like you were talking about, looking back to his faithfulness, how like we're still carrying through this together, and how he's taught us so much along the way, and he's used it to help other adoptive families understand the importance of this relationship, and being able to just giving me opportunities like my writing, or I do like consultation calls and things like that just help continue to pass along, like, this is what was really helpful for us, and here's how you can do it too within your situation. And I think just the book writing alone, like, that's a feat in itself, to get it to live through the moments again, and having the time to write that as a mom of five. And, I had to raise funds to get it published, and like God showed up in that and just provided a way for it to get done. So I don't know. I feel like he's, when you look for things at little, God winks and love notes of the Lord, like it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's a good word.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And you mentioned your book again. It's such a beautiful story, and I'm going to have a word about that. But before I do, I want to ask you one last question, which is, what's one thing, if somebody is out there listening in a very similar situation, teenage girl, and then I'll speak to people who know the teenage girl, but what would be the one thing you would share with somebody who's really contemplating similar decisions right now?
I think the biggest thing is to pray about it. I know what it's like to be, I'm sure we all do as Christians, is being at the end of yourself and being like, I don't know the answer to everything, and I don't know which way to turn. And even if, I wouldn't say I was necessarily a Christian throughout my pregnancy. I think I was like, the seeds had been planted, and God was using this experience to really press in and to bloom through it. And to come to faith. And so maybe you're in that place too, where you're kind of like, I think there's a God, I think he hears me, but like really pray about it and ask for, these confirmations and signs, not just how new agey or anything, but like God does meet you where you are, and he will show up and answer in some way. And it can be such unexpected ways that are coincidences that really can only be explained by God. And so I think the biggest thing for me was, and what I advise is like to have peace in the situation, whether you're choosing to parent, whether you're choosing to, look at adoptive families, like you've got to have peace within your heart and your soul. Because if something feels off, then it probably is. And so there's always a way to like redirect no matter where you are in that. And so keep searching until you find peace with what is right for you.
Keep searching until you find peace. I love that. Such a beautiful just word for those young girls out there. I would say one last thing to close us out about Leah's book. And this is for anybody who may know or may one day know somebody in a situation that Leah found herself in. I highly recommend you get this book. She just not only beautifully details her experience, but her experience with other people, which she even mentioned on today's podcast, how it was other people supporting her. Man, like I would say the first 3/4 of your book is a really good template for anybody to pick up and say, how do I support somebody in this situation? How do I just show up? How do I show up? So the 16th year, a beautiful memoir of Leah's story, and you can hear more of those God winks and details and just all the ways that God showed up in her life and through other people in her life. Highly recommend you pick it up. Leah, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's such an incredibly beautiful story that I know is an inspiration to so many out there. And I just once again applaud you for using such a critical time in your life and using it for a ministry and a beautiful ministry. Well done. And for all of our listeners out there, we will see you back in 2 weeks with our next Only God story. So see you then. Thank you for listening to the Only God Stories podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media as we share more stories like these. And don't forget to check out our website at onlygodstories.org for more information on how you can share how the power of God has moved in your life.